About 30 more seconds. Okay, finish your sentence. Wrap up your words. Okay. All right. I gave you more time for that one than usual. I don't know if you could tell. Who would like to go first? Susan.
Okay. At her new coffee maker refused to begin brewing her coffee. The woman got increasingly panicked. She searched high and low for her old Mr. Coffee to no avail. Practically, she texted her brother who lived in Tennessee, but is the provider of all things coffee in her life. He did not reply straight away, so she texted her husband. Finally, after tickling the cord in the back of the machine, the light came on and the glorious liquid dripped into a pot, and the rumble and a purr could be heard emanating from the coffee maker. Smiling, she grabbed a clean mug from the dishwasher and hurried to pour the steaming coffee from the pot. Upon the first sip, her smile got wider. Thank you, Lord. She exclaimed.
I love how you made a whole drama out of the coffee maker not working. That's hilarious. I love it, Susan. Thank you. That's great. All right. Who would like to go next? Chris?
That was epic, Susan. Thank you. Made me laugh. Let's see. The kids are whining like a cloud of mosquitoes as we wend our way up the Devil's Post Pile Trail. I'm trying not to snap at them. After all, they're young, 7 of them between the ages of 5 to 8. The dust is in my nose, Shelley says, stopping in the middle of the trail. Her pink face is etched with drops of sweat that drip from her hairline. The other 6 join in. I'm thirsty. I'm tired. How far to the top? Carl says, if you find a clean pebble, you can suck on it, and that will help with the thirst. The children don't move. All 14 eyeballs swivel towards him, squinting with disbelief. Carl, one of the reasons I married him is his relentless optimism, but the kids aren't buying it. Our oldest, Cindy, who's 8, counters with, water is what helps with thirst. The other 6 little ones mutter in agreement with her, water, we need water. I say, we'll get water when we reach the top. There's a lake there.
Oh, nice. I was all waiting for more because I was deep in it. I love it. Awesome. Good job. All right. Who'd like to go next? Rev, but you're muted.
I have a question. Were we supposed to do dialogue?
Whatever. I just write a little,
okay.
you know me, however it came
Okay.
out.
All right. I watched her ride her bike down the street. She and her friends were jumping an angled board in order to gain airspace, like a gymnast taking a vault, first hitting a springboard, then doing whatever they're doing in the air. It was my daughter's turn, and she lined up perpendicular to the board and took off. Her younger brother was watching from the peanut gallery with the rest of the neighborhood. She takes off despite common sense trepidations. She's airborne, and suddenly she's not. She's lying on the floor, swearing something. The gang muttering under their breath. She stays on the ground for a while. Everyone gets closer. I run as fast as I can to assess the damage. Her second day in a row of falling off her bike. By the time I can assess what's happened, she's on her feet, scratched and bruised, holding her arm. The bike is in a twisted heap. Someone calls out, which I can't identify. I take my daughter out of the wreckage and walk home. Her father will have a fit.
Thank you. All right. Who would like to go next? Stuart?
Okay. I'm not sure I can read my handwriting. This one was all over the place. What's wrong with that guy? He missed the cutoff man on the throw from outfield and then screams, "Fuck you, Baskin," to the shortstop when he got upset. I've seen this guy and he has a great arm, but trying to throw a runner out at home plate from left field is nearly impossible in softball. The whole scene got worse when Stewart's father jumps out of the stands and starts running on the field, and he's shouting at him, "Don't you use that language." In the middle of a Sunday softball game, I'm witness to a sideshow that doesn't end well. The runner scores safe at home plate, and then Stewart runs off the field, probably heading to the safety of his home. I can't wait until next week's game. Who knows what drama will unfold? And I thought softball was boring.
Cute. I love it. It's great. Thanks, Stuart. All right, Peggy, what about you? Still muted, my friend.
I'm sorry, I had my sound off and I thought everybody was still ready.
Oh.
So anyway, I might have missed some. Did other people go besides Stuart?
Yeah, everyone.
Well,
But you know what? I recorded it.
Yeah.
So you can watch it later.
Okay, so let me find mine, and I apologize, everybody.
No worries.
Um,
They were brilliant, of course.
Oh, of course. Well, mine rivals Stuart's, so we'll see. Carol, Sandy, Peggy, and I stood up from lunch to head back to nursing class. A wonderful bond held the four of us single mothers banded together, and we often met in the cafeteria as we jumped through hoops trying to get our registered nursing licenses. As we grabbed our trays and headed to the weigh station, I led our group as we wound past tables emptying of students. The 1 o'clock hour was getting near. All of a sudden, Peggy was screaming behind me, yelling at 4 young students. I turned and they all had their mouths agape, shocked at her behavior. It was so out of character for her that the 3 of us stood back to watch. "Come back here and clean up your tables," her fevered pitch so high her voice was shrill. "Your mother doesn't live here. Don't be leaving your messes for somebody else to clean up." I had no idea what made her so mad, but it was embarrassing to me. Sandy and Carol took a step back and then walked toward the exit, so I followed them. Let Peggy do what she's going to do on her own. I hate it when she does stuff like that, drawing all that crazy attention to us.
Nice. Awesome. Good work, everybody. So like the idea behind this writing prompt is to try and, I know it's impossible to get objectivity, but to sort of look at your own experience from a different angle and from I recommend this if you are struggling with a scene where you can't get access or it's too painful or it's too intense, like give yourself a little exercise and see if you can try and write it from someone else's perspective. What does that open up? Not to mention, especially if you're writing about a difficult person in your life, which, you know, as Gayle is doing in her memoir, and you're worried about the judgments that you might make or presenting them in a bad light, like write that same scene from their perspective. Imagine it. Of course, you're just imagining it. Write it from a perspective of a family member who takes their side or a person who is more on their wavelength. Think about ways that you can maybe get outside of your own biases as a person, your own, you know, because ultimately you can't, not really, but you can play and you can try. And I think that it can open doorways into the material personally. So that's partly why I wanted to play with that. It actually reminds me of this is kind of different, but when I was a kid, like a teenager, I had this dream where I was like walking down the, actually, I think I had it as in my 20s. I was walking down the hallway at school with some friends, and then the dream like stopped and started over. And then the perspective changed. So I was watching myself and my friends come down. And the thought that I had was, oh, I'm not as awful as I think I am. Like I had all these perceptions of myself. And I thought that was a really cool dream of like, you know, we're often so stuck inside how we see ourselves, how we see others. So anything we can do to pull ourselves out of that can be fruitful. Okay, so I have some questions. Do you guys want me to start with asking questions, or do you want to start with just talking a little bit about the heat, what you liked in this next few sections, or where would you like to start?
Questions.
Questions? Okay, and you can also talk about what you liked, what worked for you. Okay, so some of the questions that came up for me is, let's talk about Gayle's tone / attitude toward her mother. How would you characterize the way in which she's talking about her mother, describing her? How does she feel about her based on how she kind of presents her? That's where I'd like to start. Like, if you were to say, Gayle feels this way about her mother. Yeah, Chris, and then Stuart.
She's almost parental with her mother at this point. And she's very understanding. I mean, given what's going on, and that's, you know, rather difficult to deal with, her mother's struggle with mental illness and, you know, how she's behaving. And, that, you know, as a child, that can be really frustrating. And I feel like her tone is almost parental. I mean, there's some exasperation, but really that's what it reads to me.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So yeah, and to me that feels like a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
You know, being parental. Stuart, did you want to add a comment?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I found it complex because I saw her talking about her mother from a variety of different angles. You know, one was the parental kind of thing. One was the woe is me, look what you did to me. The other was, wow, I give you credit for being persevering in what effort she was doing and her creativity and that whole thing. And what I didn't pick up though was, I'm trying to remember now, a lot of, I feel sorry for you, but there was some of that there, but
From Gayle toward her mother, you mean?
Pardon me?
You mean you feel Gayle did not express sort of feeling sorry for her? You mean pity or sympathy or empathy?
Probably, I think that evolves over the course of the book, but there isn't a whole lot of, there may be some empathy, but not a whole lot of pity.
Mm-hmm.
And but what I found quite interesting is all the different angles that she takes at talking, addressing her
Yes,
mother.
absolutely. Yeah. So it's like, well, that kind of leads to another question, but let me just see if anyone else has a comment about that before I move on. Anyone else want to say anything about her, you know, Rev and then Chris?
Well, she admires her in a way, you know, and yet she deals with the horror of the whole situation, you know, so it's always like it's double-edged.
Yes.
A lot of times.
Yes, very much so. Chris, did you want to add another?
I do. So, Stuart, that was really astute what you said. And in thinking about that, uh, it's like she's negotiating. It's a very difficult situation. And I find myself in difficult situations negotiating all these different angles, trying to figure it out. And it's not a situation that can actually be figured out, but she's trying every angle, trying to figure out how to resolve this thing. So yeah, that was interesting comment.
Yeah. Let me let Peggy reply and then Stuart.
Well, I was so impressed with the amount of empathy that she innately had. Just looking at my own feelings, I wouldn't have had, I would have either had pity or anger, and not so much that came in between. And yet that's where she was, and I think she stayed throughout the book. And to me, it was inspiring, absolutely inspiring. And I just want to add one other thing. As an emergency nurse, I had to come to terms with how much children whose mother just broke their arms loved their mother. So that thread went through that whole book.
Yeah, I want to touch on that. Susan, do you want to add anything to this part of the discussion? No? Okay. Yeah, Stuart.
I wanted to build on Chris's point because I thought that was interesting. Is that I sort of found this interesting in that she addresses her mother in a way that, because of her illness, each of us could be addressing other people because we're all complex like that in a way. But this just sort of, was so egregious that she was able to, call it out the way she did. But also one other thing that came to mind was that she was also, Gayle, an accomplice. So because she played into, the misdiagnosis and all that stuff as a child. So as she's addressing her mother, I think she also recognized that she was sort of part of the problem in that kind of way too.
I think that's an interesting point about the vulnerability of the narrator and that she holds herself accountable. But what I think is, had she not called it out, we would have judgments about it. But because she called it out, we don't judge her for it. And she was a child, right? That's a coping skill. Chris.
That's what I was going to say. I wouldn't call her an accomplice. She's a child. Shit happens. Kids love their parents and they're loyal and they do whatever necessary to keep that relationship. They're dependent on their parents. So, but I know what you're saying, Stuart. I don't think you meant it in that way, but yeah, children are dependent on their parents. So they're kind of in line.
And it's an interesting way to look at it from the perspective of the narrator as a character who we want to see our narrators in a certain light, right? We want to see them as a hero of their story. And yet Gayle saying, look, I'm not a hero because, in order to cope with this difficult to cope with situation, I had to come up with these other strategies that were really not okay either for me. I'm not saying judging them wise. So I think there's a lot of interesting details about reliability of the narrator. Do we trust her or not? I also want, kind of stepping back a second, I was thinking, do we feel like this is, I guess the question I have is, do we feel like she's writing as though walking on eggshells? Like, how much of this story, remember when we talked to her, didn't she say she had to really process some of her anger first before she could write it? And I feel like she did process it very well, because I don't actually think a lot of the anger comes through. But as a reader, I'm like, I know it's there. And a part of me feels like she, even in the writing of it, she's still protecting her mother. I don't know if anyone else felt that way. Yeah. Chris?
Well, her mother's dead by the time she writes it. And, we're pretty well conditioned not to speak ill of people who are dead. But also it may have been for her own sanity to revisit that anger can be really destructive to a person. Yeah. And I thinking by the time she wrote it, she had probably processed a lot of her anger, but there is a sort of carefulness about how she presents the story. And I know it is like walking on eggshells, but I think part of it is that she's processed the anger and that might get in the way of the story that she
Mhm.
wants to tell.
Yeah,
The
I was
anger could overshadow it.
exactly. I was thinking about how this memoir would read differently if she'd written it from the angry place, and why we're able to read it because of the way she wrote it. So like, and thinking about, because one of the things I actually looked online for a bunch of articles. I couldn't find anything, which kind of frustrated me. What I was trying to find was how to write about difficult people in your life, people who have caused harm and have been damaging. Most of the time it's unconscious or unintentional, but you know, it happens. And a lot of people come out of different kinds of abuse, whether it's physical or psychological or emotional, or because their parent is mentally ill, or like my parent, my mother struggled with substance abuse disorder. So, you know, she didn't set out to behave badly, but those things can happen, can result. So, so all of us have difficult people, I think, in our stories probably, and or difficult situations to describe. How do we write about them in ways that where the rage doesn't overtake us, but at the same time we can be true to ourselves. Stuart, what were you going to say?
I had a question. You provoked a thought, and I don't know whether this came across, and I didn't think about it like this when I read it, and I don't know if this is the right way to describe it, but it was almost as though she was, in many cases, talking about her mother to her mother in a muted anger kind of way. So it was sort of like a below the surface, but it sort of is there, but it's not a direct anger that's coming out.
It's definitely subtle. Yeah, Peggy.
I'm glad that she told us that she muted the anger. But as I told you in a private meeting, I believe in writing in the anger, in the heat, and then editing afterwards. Not to tone it down, but just to make it so that you don't chase your reader away.
Right.
But maybe I would have been more satisfied if I felt that anger that I felt towards that mother.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting though, because what I think she does, so I asked myself the same question: does leaving the anger out allow us to feel it for her? In a sense, it's like we then carry it because it's enraging, or would we feel more empathy if it was in there? That's a question. I just finished a memoir, very different subject, and then I'll get to you, Rev, about a woman who blows up her life with an affair, and it's like, you know, this whole drama, and it's very, very well done, and it's full of, the feelings are all there on the page. Like she wrote into it in a lot of places, and so it was a very different reading experience for me, but I can't say it was a bad one. Like it was a page turner, frankly. So
what is it?
Oh, it's called Blow Your House Down by Gina Frangella. But I do think there's this line we have to walk. I think, so what I keep coming back to is that we have to, you can't be completely factual like a reporter, but you can try to describe what happened, only presenting your own narrator's experience of it and being very clear, this is my experience of it. My sister, my father, my friend might have had the same experience and experienced it very differently, so that you don't come across as finger pointing, you know, telling, excoriating, you know, because I think when the narrator does that, then the reader loses sympathy, unless it's like you're describing a scene in which you had a fight with someone and you're just saying what you said. But like if the narrative voice is like, you know, and my mother's rage ruined my life, you know, we're going to sort of feel like, I don't know. It seems to steal the thunder somehow. So it's more like you have to show it in action. Yeah. Rev, you'd had your hand up.
Yeah. You know, I'm kind of reading several things at the same time, which is kind of new to me. And I'm comparing another story that's very close to me, where the narrator has not recovered from her anger. And it really is a terrible story. And it's like, I'm getting angry because of it, you know? And with Gayle, I can see where she's admiring her mother.
Yeah.
You know, and yes, it's very difficult, and she's going through a lot of the pain of birth and the, you know, the new, you know, the new baby and being vulnerable. And I'm glad that she waited till the anger doesn't overcome her, you know.
Yeah. I mean, it would be a different story.
It would be, you know, and I also, you know, for my acting, you know, side of the street, you know, when someone is bawling their eyes out and they're crying and whatever, you don't identify as much, or I don't identify as much as if somebody's just has all that stuff inside and it's just holding it. And you know that they've got they're sitting on a secret, and they're sitting on a pile of nerves, you know, and they're just controlling it, and you bawling your, you know, your eyes
Right.
out instead.
Well, that is the goal, right? The goal is that we create the emotion in the reader through how we describe it on the page. Yeah, Chris.
As a reader, I want to have a relationship with the writer in the story. And if they're telling me how to feel and they're just throwing it at me, there's no space for me in that story. And I feel completely left out. I want to have my own response, my own reaction. So that is a real turnoff for me as how I read. I just feel like there's no place for me to interact with this material at all.
Absolutely.
So that's my response.
And I think that's really common. And that's true in fiction and nonfiction. Like if you tell the reader everything, the reader feels frustrated, bored, impatient, and like you don't trust them. So it's this fine art. I mean, that's why the scene is so powerful. How do we use scenes to draw out? Now, obviously Gayle does more than use scenes, but she does a lot of scene work, you know, and then she has that letter function and then her mother's story. Well, another question I had, or another thought is, did you notice the difference in narrative voice between voice of innocence and voice of experience? Did you notice when she was writing almost in that younger person's mind? And how did you, you know, almost relate to her as two different people throughout the story? Yeah. Anything to say about that? Chris?
The vocabulary changed when she was in that younger voice. There was a different vocabulary in the sentence. The prosody was different. The texture of the sentences was really different in both of those voices. And so, you know, there was this child perspective and then an adult reflection on it. Yep. So, yeah, there was a big difference. The other thing well, this isn't related to that. I'll hold that thought.
There's a moment, I forget if she's in the doctor's office somewhere, but somebody asks her what her relationship with her mother's like. And she says, it's great. And then she bursts into tears and she's like horrified because she doesn't want to admit that the relationship is complicated. I thought that was such a great moment of like classic young person not knowing how to process their feelings, but also not being able to lie, you know, at the same time. Oh, it's just brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, Rev, did you have a question or a comment? Oh, okay, Stuart. Because what I want us to be really conscious of these, if we shift between voice of innocence and voice of experience. And remember, voice of innocence really just means like voice of the present moment. It's not necessarily, you can write from the voice of innocence when you're 60 or 40 or 20. It's that you're writing in the moment of the scene unfolding versus analyzing it and giving us meaning later, right? So in Gayle's case, she actually has younger herself and an older self, but not every story does that. Yeah, Peggy.
What I find difficult is I'm writing in a younger voice and I'm giving information that only the older person would know. It's so difficult for me.
Very hard.
I want to share that information, but I don't want to interject the older voice right then. So
I know it's like
skill I'm struggling with.
I feel like part of it is learning to reveal only what your narrator knew at that time, for one thing. And also, but again, coming back to, because, and sometimes you can fudge that. You can have your younger narrator know more than they really did for the sake of the story, as long as it doesn't come across like, you know.
I have a good example from today's writing. Stuart doesn't tell us it's a mobile when he's speaking in the younger voice.
That's right.
He tells us later.
Right.
It's a really good example.
I like that. I like that too. Yeah. And so a lot of that takes imagining sometimes, like what would my younger self have thought of this moment, because we don't really necessarily remember. But you know what's interesting? Sometimes I'll read So having a child who is almost 13 has been very useful to me as a writer, because that's why I had him, just for writing. Because what I realize is, like, I'll read something in someone's manuscript I'm editing, and it'll be like a 10-year-old kid, and I'll, in the years past, I'd be like, oh, they sound so precocious. And then I'm like, my 10-year-old is freaking precocious. They're smart, or my 11 at 13, like, his complexity of thought is so much greater than I give him credit for sometimes, that I'm like sitting there going, and I remember feeling that way. And I have journals too to show you. But so it's kind of interesting to realize that you might have actually been more aware than you thought you were, especially in a younger self. But it's finding that voice so it doesn't sound too precocious. That's tricky. But kids are very aware. It's just that they have all those internal messages from the family about what they are supposed to talk about, what they can and can't do and say. All of those limits, they shape how they discuss their stories. Yeah, but I like that too, because I was reading through some of the sections where she's, they're dealing with, is it Crohn's disease and constipation and all these things. The voice feels very young to me. Like, you can feel her putting all this trust in the doctors and her mother, even though part of her is like, I know I'm not really sick. So actually, I'd like to talk a little bit about that transition from when she realizes she isn't sick, and then she starts to play sick, and she calls it the sick girl charade, a term I thought was really great. How do we receive her as a reader, where we get to that point where we now know she is lying to doctors? What are our judgments and observations? Yeah, Stuart.
Just to clarify, part of when I said accomplice, and I agree that the comments that were made earlier about when you were a child and how you react to those things, but that's what I was sort of referring to, is the point where she was old enough, but she was still playing into it for her own sake. When I first read that, my reaction was, I started to turn on Gayle. A little bit. And it was interesting because I was with her all the way, and then that came, and then I started to find myself turning on her and say, wait a second, you're a part of this whole deal yourself now. And then as I read on, and that changed obviously quite a bit because I understood it better. But at that moment, I found myself turning a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else have that experience where you were a little judgmental, or, wondering why? Susan?
Yeah, based on my own experiences, I kind of turn on Gail. That be more understanding.
So you were more understanding, or you were less understanding at that point?
I turned on Gail.
So
I was like, trying to tell her be more understanding.
Got it. Interesting. So there's points in the story where for some people, your sense of trusting the narrator just flipped a little bit. And I actually think that's pretty normal. That's, again, back to this, even though many of us may say, okay, she was a child. This is what she learned to do. She didn't really have any other choices because she had no other skills. But as a reliable narrator, at that point, we've sort of seen her mother as the one who is deceptive and deceiving or delusional. So I think there is a moment where the reader kind of goes, wait, can I trust this narrator anymore? Even though we might at the same time be able to say she's a child, So, and I actually think that's very well done. I think that Gayle, it's her way of being really boldly honest. She's like, not only am I telling you about my mother's failings, but I'm telling you about my own.
But my own.
And so at first we mistrust her, but then it actually, I think, breeds deeper trust, because she's saying, I'm going to show you all the ugly parts of myself. So that's my experience of it, but it's interesting to see different reactions to it.
But I think that's an interesting point, that when that happened, I became more aligned with her because of her vulnerability.
Exactly.
To be that open and honest and share her, I'm culpable in some way myself,
Yeah.
And share that very openly the way she did.
I think so too. I think it breeds a deeper relationship with the reader. I think you start to feel like this is a person I can trust because they're willing to show me everything. You know, it's like they're not hiding from me. Yeah, Peggy.
I had a different reaction to it because I had this very similar mother.
Mm,
That was a survival technique for
absolutely.
me, to just buy in with her and support her in what she was doing. And I was convinced that this new symptom was there, at the time. So,
Yeah.
rather than put me off, I went, "Wow, I've never seen anybody confess to this
Yeah.
duplicity."
I mean, I think the end result is the same. It's just depending on your personal life experiences, you might read it differently, right? So if you've never had any kind of experience like that, it might seem foreign to you. If you've had an experience like that, it might seem like, finally, I see myself in the pages of a book, or I see someone who's been through something as intense as me, or whatever. Um, but to me, it's one of the things I admire the most about her and about writers who do this, which is to lay themselves bare, because I think, A, it's super brave, because it does invite judgment, even if ultimately you come out on the other side. It does invite judgment. That's the same thing with this book I just read, The Blow Your House Down. Like, it invites tremendous judgment because she has an affair, she, does all these things wrong, but she makes a good point, which is like, when men do these things, they get forgiven. Women, it's like the world comes crashing down because a woman dared to have an affair or whatever. So and that's kind of the larger story, is like, yes, and she owns her shit completely. And I went through periods of time. This is the other book I'm talking about. There are periods of time where I didn't like her as a reader, but I did admire her candor. And I think that's something I even talk about with fiction, that if you can show a character's motivations and where they come from and why they're doing what they're doing, then readers will still stick around and stay invested even when they're behaving quote unquote badly or out of character, because we understand why they're doing that, because we're human and we're messy, and most of us had some kind of dysfunction growing up. I don't think anybody I know has had a perfect happy childhood, or midlife, or who knows, there's all kinds of ways to get messed up. So but that was another one of the topics I had down here, was vulnerability versus confession. So how we share those parts of our lives matters. So for instance, I feel like Gayle does a good job by putting us in scene with her in these doctor's offices and with her mom and in her body. Had she just I'm trying to think how, had she kind of made it more of a telling, like more expository, and she just kind of told us, I behaved badly, I bought into my mother's schemes, whatever, I don't think we would have connected as much, right? So it's vulnerability, but it's how the vulnerability is shown to us. Does that ring true for you, Chris?
Well, it's vulnerability because it's told in a vulnerable way. It's revealed through what happened. So she puts you right there. Whereas if she told us, there's this distance from
Yeah.
what happened, and we're not right there, but being right there, some of the feelings that little kid had going through that, and some of her thought processes, I was feeling that myself because we
Yeah.
were right there in the moment. Whereas
Yeah.
telling it's hard. It doesn't really connect you. It's important, but it doesn't connect the reader.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's to me, that's the magic of scene writing, and it's hard to master until you master it. Then once you do, you kind of wonder how you ever didn't write that way. I find that it's like a mental process that you have to learn to adopt, especially hard for memoir writers because we're drawing from our real lives, and it's easy with fiction because you can make it all up, but with our truths, we have to sit down and we have to put ourselves back in the moment and remember what things looked like, smelled like, who was there, how did they talk, and there's a lot, and as well as remembering our feelings about it and then rendering those on the page. So I think your challenge is greater as writers, as memoir writers and essay writers, to create scenes. So if it's hard for you, you're not alone. All right. Any other thoughts that you guys have that came up, or any, that's really stuck for you, Chris?
Very talkative today. So Yeah, so two things. One is she kept flipping back and forth between her mother's movie, excerpts from that, the scene with giving birth, and another time period, a little girl. And that got confusing for me at some times. And her two children's names are similar. It's Aaron and
Asher.
Ari or Asher or something.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, which child is this?
Yeah. I
It's
hadn't
the
thought about
older one,
that.
it's the first partner, the older one. It's
Yeah.
not later on. And so I got confused a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, I was having a hard time following it. And it was fine. I just slow down and think about it logically. Okay, this has to be the first one, I think. But it was a little bit confusing for me trying to follow that collage.
Yep.
Um,
What
that-
would have made it easier for you to follow?
if she had said, here I was giving birth to my first child, or just some reference.
You needed
Just
little like cues.
cues. I just needed little place markers so I knew where I was, so I didn't have to think as hard. I really had to stop.
Yep.
And sometimes I had to flip back through the book and say, oh, right, that's her first child.
Yeah.
And a little teeny tiny cue would have been really helpful for me as a reader.
This is good information for our own stories, right? How do we cue the reader? We're shifting time, perspective. Did you have a comment, Susan?
No.
Okay, sorry.
I'm good. Fine.
Oh, good. Stuart.
One thing that hit me when I actually went back and took a look after having read this, when her mother passes away, and she learns about that, the way she described that, is she kept digging sort of deeper and deeper into it. I won't read the whole thing, but she says, a space opens up in me, a vast white space. And I was thinking, well, she could have just left it there. But then she goes on, I can't call it relief. And then she goes on, and then a sea, white as milk, but not wet as milk, opens up right at the center of me. And I was just fascinated by how complex it was, the way she described her reaction to her mother's death after all of this buildup and all this stuff. And it wasn't just one or two lines, and it was really, I thought, well done.
Right. It to me, it feels like the waves of grief, how you kind of get hit by one and then it kind of another one knocks you even, it's not simple. Grief is not simple. And actually I'm just going to mention it today, but I want to save this conversation for next week. But I want us to talk about next week kind of the role of the body and bodily things in this book, because I feel like that's an area she's unflinching around. I want to save it because for one thing, I want Natani to get here for the conversation, but let's think about that. Like, what role does the body play? How does it affect you as a reader when she describes certain things? Do you think, how many of those effects do you think are intentional? And also, I would like you to bring some images that you liked in the book. So maybe highlight some phrasing, some images that stand out for you, and try to maybe assess why they stand out for you. Like, what is it that resonates with you? Is it just because you like the way it sounds, or do you like that it's thematic to the book, or she phrases something in a way you've never heard before? So those are the two things I'd like you to think about for next week, thinking about the body and the bodily descriptions and imagery. And let's see if I have any other notes on here. Also, I think for next week, let's talk a little bit about, oops, Jessie logged on early to our class. She's on New Jersey time, so she's probably confused, but hi, Jessie, we're not there yet. Anyways, the other thing I want us to think about is how the whole kind of use, how she relates to the idea of delusion, like her mother's delusion, how she describes it, how she relates to it, because I think that's another piece where sometimes we may see her as more or less reliable as a narrator, if that makes sense. Okay, all right. Let me just. So, okay, what I'd like to do is take a quick break, restroom break, and then we will move on to Stuart's critique. And Jessie, you're early for class. You're early for 3 o'clock class. And otherwise,
I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I love seeing your face.
East Coast, West Coast. I'll see you in an hour.
I was saying you're in New Jersey, right? So
yeah,
it happens. But
I once came at 3 too.
Well,
with 3 my time.
Yeah, so it was like 12. Well, your face is always welcome.
I'll be back
See you
in
in
a
an
bit.
hour.
Sorry, guys.
No worries. We're in a pause, so you're good. You're not interrupting. All right, I'll be back in just a minute. Let's say 3 minutes. Okay, I'm back. Getting my second vaccine tomorrow. Planning to be out of commission on Friday.
Yeah.
I have my husband, he's going to give a presentation to my Friday evening class. He says he calls himself the substitute teacher because I don't know how I'm going to feel, could be in bed.
Yeah.
Make sure you drink lots and lots and lots of fluid. That's yeah.
I'm pre-hydrating and we'll post-hydrate as well.
Yeah.
All the teas. Yeah. In fact, maybe I'll go get some electrolytes today. Yeah. Anyways, but I'm excited. Get her done. And it sounds like the kids are going to be able to be vaccinated soon. And that makes me happy. So, all right. Yes. So Stuart, as a practice I adopt in other classes, and I'm trying to remember to bring it back to all of them, is would you read a paragraph or two from your piece so we can get back into the mindset of your work? And you can pick whichever ones you want to read. Oh, here comes trouble. Stop it.
Would I read a paragraph or two? Was yours?
Yep, aloud, so we can hear your story in your voice.
I need to find it.
Didn't even come prepared with your own story.
Oh,
Just giving you crap.
all right. So a paragraph or two?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wherever
I'll
you'd like.
start from the beginning. The thing, okay. The
Deep
thing
breath.
I see above me is spinning and sound is coming from it. The colors are bright and I feel connected to it. Staring at it as it goes round and round gives me a new sensation. Looking at my hand gives me an awareness of separateness from everything else. I lie there and slowly feel the separation becoming more and more clear. In and out of this awareness, I float. I am me. I can see and sense all of this, but have no other awareness. I am just here. This was my first experience with consciousness and myself as an entity. I was an infant in my crib when I had that experience. I've had that memory my whole life. It keeps coming back to me, and the details never change. It is burned into my being. I can still feel the sensation of seeing the mobile going around, the motion and the colors that mesmerize me. And while this is happening, I also start feeling the whole experience of self-identification, becoming a person unto myself.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna do our timer thing. When you hear the timer, you still have time to wrap up your thoughts. Just who would like to go first? Chris.
Selfishly, I just want to make sure I get to say what I want to say. So if I go first, I get to do that. Wait, I have got my notes on the screen, so but I want to be able to see Stuart as well because this is about your writing. Here we go. The opening was really amazing. It totally got my attention. I was in that crib with that baby, looking at that mobile. It was really such great writing. And I think your writing is so strong when you're in scene. I want more of that. I want the perspective of the narrator. I want to know what he's thinking and more of what he's feeling. That really just brings me right there. I also was curious why this event was important to the rest of the narrator's life. And that wasn't really said. It was said that it was important, but even a teeny tiny hint at the end of the chapter or the piece, just as a teaser of why this event was so important, because it was said that it was important, but nothing else was said about it, about why. And then there was a part in there about the narrator's passion for the work in business about executive compensation. And I want to know why is the narrator passionate about that? What is it? I don't know what it is, executive compensation. And then why is a narrator passionate about it? So I can get passionate about it too and have excitement and empathy for that experience because I don't know what it is. So more about that than even than the details. It's like, why does this matter? Why does this matter to the narrator? Why is it important? Why is it important in the world? So just a little more on that. And then the other piece was about the job piece, how it fell into the narrator's lap and then the promotion happened and all that. And for some of us, it doesn't happen that way, maybe because we're women or gay or whatever. And so maybe some acknowledgement that that experience might not be the same for other people. It would just be easier as a reader, it'd be easier for me to read it if there was some acknowledgement of that, or how, I'm not sure how to do it. I'm struggling with similar issues myself, writing about other cultures and other situations. So I don't have an answer, but it's just, it's something to think about. I don't know what the answer is. Like I said, I'm struggling with myself, but really there were some sections in there where you just had me right there on the page with you. And that's what I love about your writing when you do that.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
You know what I'm going to try to do is see if I can find a guest speaker who could maybe help us with these topics of how do we bring into our work the acknowledgement, because it's like we're writing about ourselves, then how do we acknowledge these other issues in a way that feels seamless and organic and makes sure we acknowledge like our privilege or, or whatever it is, privilege, without it just being like, oh, I tacked that on, right? because, you know, I think we are all grappling with these issues, particularly today when people are much more legitimately sensitive about them. So I'm going to look into getting us some support about that, because I would like to learn as well. All right, who would like to go next? How about Peggy? Oh, sorry, Susan raised her hand, so I'll go with Susan first, and then can you hear that ridiculously loud bird?
Yeah,
I'm going to mute myself while you guys talk. Hush, bird.
I really love this. But what really got me the most was the last time an experience that will connect my infant memory of consciousness with something more profound than I could ever have imagined. That totally. Woo.
Awesome. Was that all you had to say, or I don't want to cut you off? Okay, awesome. Thank you, Susan. All right, Peggy.
Okay. Well, what I really loved about this piece was the way you opened up and were letting me in to see these profound changes happen in you, even the one as a baby, you know, and then the change from executive, which to me is kind of like studying some creature that I don't understand, to opening up your consciousness and exploring other parts of the world for you. And I felt really grateful to be kind of sitting in the audience there watching your evolution. And I don't know if this seems like a departure from the story that you were writing about your mom dying, and wondered how those two will eventually merge into one book. Anyway, I think that's all.
Thanks, Peggy. Rev?
I have a question to.
Oh, you just muted yourself.
I
have a question?
guess I was unmuted and I muted myself. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Is this a completely new? Peggy just said it ties in with the mother and the granddaughter, and I was almost under the impression that this is a brand new memoir that had nothing to do with what we'd seen before. So is it or isn't it?
No, it's a new beginning of the same memoir.
Of the same memoir.
And Stuart will explain why it's new and where he's going with it after, when he gets a chance to talk. So just speak to it.
All right.
About what you liked and what worked for you and what you needed to.
Okay, because in my mind, I thought he was starting a brand new book. So, you know, it's a totally different, you know, impression that you know, I have about that. So I'll just speak to what I was feeling as I was reading, you know, and my voice is already rising in anxiety and anxiousness. I was seeing it as the start of someone who's discovering himself, you know, and wanting to both understand and justify and live through his choices of what he was doing in life, and having a midlife crisis, you know, and I could relate to that, because I remember how fearful I was when my husband went from one career to a second career, and I was so anxious for him to get the job already, you know, never mind, let's drive across the country and get to where we're going to live, and you know, and I don't know where the house is going to be and my friends are going to be, and or anything else is going to be, and you know, I was very anxious. But I'm extremely curious about what his life as an executive looked like, what the substance of it was, what the, what the feelings were. Why did he all of a sudden feel like he needed to jump ship? And it's very brave to jump ship without a parachute. And I'd like to know about those feelings as well. Somebody already mentioned about executive compensation. That I don't know anything about HR. My experience deals with another side of the house, which HR never really enters into it. And I'm curious, I'm eager to go on that ride and to be educated more, especially with more emotion and more scenes, so that I could see what's going on. Yeah.
Thanks, Rob. All right. Thank you, Stuart, for submitting this. And I'm probably the only one here who has a little back context about why the new direction and where we think it's going, and how it is going to tie into the larger story, but I'll let Stuart talk about that. But because of that, I may have read it a little differently than the rest of you. So for me, I think the heat for me in this piece, well, first of all, the opening is beautiful. The language, there's a lyrical quality to it, and that is a little different. I mean, it is different from some of the other pieces you've submitted, but I like it, and I like it a lot, enough that I want you to do more of it. What I like is this journey that this character is going on, this narrator, and I definitely get the sense that it is a journey, and I think that the way the beginning starts is very important, because it's about like coming into your own sense of yourself. And so the beginning, we start with the very first moment that the narrator comes into a sense of himself. And then we have other moments, and it's sort of like catalyzed by this book. Why this book? Sometimes something strikes us at the right time, and it just speaks to us. So I think what I'm hearing people say, and what my experience was as well, is that we need just a tiny bit more of understanding who the Stuart was before the epiphany, or before finding that book, and what his life looked like. And it can be short. It doesn't even have to be very long. A couple paragraphs, in scene, even describing a busy, hectic life, what that work life looks like, and maybe the stress of being away from his family too much, or his wife is complaining about not having enough time with him. I don't know. And then, sort of like, so we see how that pressure has built. We need to see the pressure cooker that he's under, so that by the time he goes and finds that book, we're like, oh yes, great. He's finding some help, or something is happening for him. So I think it's just about sort of structuring it so that we see a little before, and then we see that and then I do think we need a little greater understanding of why he's so willing to quit. And that'll all be built in that same beginning, I would hope. And it could even be a conversation he has with his wife after a really awful day at work, that epitomizes the way his work life has been going. Or, because I'm trying to help you conceive of a way to put it in scene, rather than just like, I had a busy job and it was hard. So a little bit of that. And then we have this epiphany of the book that speaks to him. And then I love how desperate he is to find this book again. And it's not just as simple as going and picking it up off the shelf. And then it helps him to make this shift. So then once he makes the shift, we also similarly need to understand on the other side of it, what it is about this job that is so compelling. Because as readers, we don't know anything about executive compensation. And, I'm not to be rude, but that doesn't sound like the most exciting job ever. So you need to tell us what it is about that speaks to him. Because I know that a lot of jobs sound really not like what they are, but I suspect it has to do with working with people and connecting with people and helping them out, which I imagine is very meaningful work. So to me, this is like this beginning sets up that this narrator is on a search for meaning and authenticity in his life, and that he's begun this quest toward that journey. And then of course his mother becomes ill. I know that's the next phase. So ultimately also I felt like I wanted some more scenes, and there were places I made specific notes like show us in scene. And there's some parts that were in scene where I felt like you could actually condense like the pleasantries and the dialogue and kind of get to the meat of it quicker. But I think if you can kind of keep the focus on that spiritual journey, I'm calling it that for lack of a better word. Your narrator just calls it a journey, but that inner journey toward authenticity or, happiness in his life. And that therefore show us what it is, what's his life like before, what's his life like after, in some color, in some detail. I think then the reader will come away and go, okay, I get it. He was miserable. He needed change. He made change. And in that change, he started to uncover who he really is. And he needed to be at that stage in life when his mother begins to grow ill, because he brings that self to the process. So that's my assessment of it. So, all right, Stuart, it's all you now.
First, thank you all for the feedback. I really, truly appreciate it. And it's great. It really resonates with me to hear what you're saying. A couple of things, and plus I took a quick look at the comments. I haven't read through them thoroughly because I just looked at them later this morning, but I appreciate those as well, and we'll look through those thoroughly. A couple of things that's interesting. I said this is a new beginning, but I didn't want to give too much of how this fits in with the rest of the memoir I had been writing, because I really wanted the kind of comments I'm getting right now, which are wonderful. The idea is that came about was that this is going to be the beginning of the memoir, which is about my mother's hospitalization and ultimately her death. What came to mind is that throughout that process of being with her in those days, 9 days in the hospital, I was being drawn back to my childhood and learning about myself in a way I never did. And I suppressed it. And I ended up going through childhood, getting into a career, working crazy, and then all of a sudden hit that wall and left. And the objective was to go back and start to figure out my true essence. And that's what brought me back to that memory in the crib. So throughout the memoir, my objective is to bring in, through stories, which I had done some already, some of my learnings about my childhood and about my true essence of who I am in this discovery mode, and what happened when my mother actually passed away, which sort of unleashed a whole new world for me. So that just sort of sets the context. Yeah. What was interesting is to hear, and I really appreciate the comments about executive compensation. I knew that would get something, but what's interesting is that I need to work on that because I didn't have a passion for it at all. I just happened to turn out to be really good at doing it. And in fact, have come to an epiphany recently by virtue of a book I just read that I was a useful idiot. Because I was good at helping executives get more pay. And I got paid okay for doing that. So I kept doing it. So it's interesting that the perception, of passion, I need to work on that because it was not a passion. It was just that I was really good at doing it.
But it brought you some kind of fulfillment, or you wouldn't have kept doing it, right?
I got paid for it.
So it facilitated, because here's the question I have is, it sounds like you left a job that you didn't love, and then you took a job you didn't love. And that doesn't look like transformation to the reader. So the question is, why? What is better about the second job? That's something you might have to explore. What was better about it than what you were doing before?
I'm sorry, the second job being?
Executive compensation, right?
Oh, okay.
Right. Which job did you quit?
Well, I had lots of jobs.
In the essay, you say, I walked in, I quit my job. What job was that?
I was the chief human resources officer of a tech company.
You quit HR and then you took the job in compensation, right?
No, I was doing compensation as part of my HR jobs.
Oh, so what did you do after you quit?
I became a consultant. And when I was asked where I had an expertise that we could sell.
You became a consultant in compensation, but you did it. So the difference is that you were working for yourself.
Right.
Okay. So that's what's not clear. Okay. Is that you, or maybe I missed it, that you went from like working in an environment where someone was telling you how to do it, and then you got to do it your way.
Well, and I got to be my own person. I wasn't working for a company.
That's what we need to make clear, because that's not clear in the essay.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful.
Because
it's complex, and I appreciate hearing what I'm hearing, because that's what I wanted to know. Because at one point I was starting to delve too deeply. I thought too deeply into my jobs, my career, But now what I'm hearing, which is helpful, I need to add a little bit more depth and explanation to some of that and not gloss over it so much.
I think it's like, we don't need to see the everyday, like the nuts and bolts of your job. We need to see the pressures that are affecting your narrator before and after, and how his life changes after quitting and then doing his own thing. So it's like, I feel like it's the job itself is almost irrelevant. Oh my God, the birds are getting into a fight outside my window. It's irrelevant what you did. So for the most part, it's more, what does the context of the environment look like, and how is that shaping your narrator before, and then how is he different after? How does that change? So like, I don't think it's that we want the details of the job so much as the pressures that it put on the narrator. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm smiling because what you did is you put me in a scene, being in the boardroom with literally the boardroom of a multi-billion-dollar company, huge, and these are executives on the board, these are big time people. And I'm up there pointing at the screen with one of those pointer pens.
Right.
Yeah.
And trying to rationalize why the executives at our company ought to make all these millions of dollars. And my hand is shaking and I'm holding my hand. So, the pointer doesn't show that and knowing that these people are going to just be really, really hard on me. And if I don't do well, I'm going to go back and my executives are not going to be happy with me if they didn't get all their stock options and all the other stuff that they wanted. So the pressure was pretty enormous.
Yeah. So I think showing the pressure and showing how it affects your narrator, their internal landscape. I realized one thing I also wanted to see more of was your wife, your narrator's wife. And in terms of, I knew, like I imagined that some of that information you revealed in exposition could have been shown in a dialogue between your narrator and his wife. Like what, because I'm sure they talked about everything together and she had input. So I wanted to, that would be a good way to bring in your life around this issue. So, there's a lot of options, but I think you've got a lot of places to go with it. It's just.
Yeah. So basically, once again, thank you. This is really, really helpful. Now I have what I wanted to do is I want to test whether I've got something and this is the right direction. And I feel I do. And now I can really dive in and work on with all this feedback. So thanks.
Good. Thank you so much for your time and your piece. All right, everybody, let's set our goals. And we'll call it a day. Okay. Susan, goal for next week. You're muted. So I'm told that if you hold down the space bar,
Right.
you can also unmute you.
Get rid of this migraine
Oh.
and write some more.
Well, I definitely hope you get rid of that migraine. Those are no fun.
Thank you.
Thank you for showing up, even though your head is hurting. I mean, you can always turn your camera off if your head is hurting. Anyways, Peggy.
I want to write chapter synopsis. I'm writing ahead of my chapter synopsis, so I'm going to go back and fill that in.
Write your chapter synopsis.
Yes, it's for about 30 chapters.
Oh, wow. Great. Rev.
Just keep writing. I'm getting toward the end of, I'm progressing on this chapter.
Awesome.
All right.
Chris.
Edit the final chapter.
Great. And Stuart.
I'm going to work on revising this new first chapter based on all the feedback I've gotten. Sort of excited about it now.
Great. Awesome. Well, have a good rest of your week, everybody. And I'll see you next week. Okay.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Jordan?
Uh-huh.
The new class schedule, when are we continuing? When is the next one?
Hang on. I have to pull up my calendar. Okay. We are in May right now,
Mhm.
and we are April. Okay, we're on the 5th, right? 1, 2, 3. So we finish on the 19th of May, and then I'm taking some time off, and we will reconvene June 23rd for anyone who wants to continue.
June. Yeah.
So we'll basically take.
And you had a whole list of classes on your website, or maybe I should have it in the private conversation. Did you change the price too?
I've
Or is
changed a
that-
lot of things. I haven't announced a lot of changes because I'm having my website redone, and I was going to wait till it's finished to announce everything.
okay.
Yes. So for this class, for continuing, that you don't have to sign up through a link. You just keep paying me the way we've done it. So nothing has changed.
Okay.
It's
Okay.
just my other classes are changing fee structure, and yes, it will all be on my website from now on. So you won't have to guess, except for this. This will not. We'll just keep paying your $100 until, I might in January, I might raise my prices just a little for continuing students, but it won't be like.
That's fine. Yeah. And then just a private question. Would it help me to join another class of yours?
It's up to you, honestly. I mean, I can't say for sure. I would imagine you might get something out of it. Most of them are geared towards fiction, but I feel like all the techniques that I talk about can be used in memoir. So
Yeah, I'm fictional. I mean, it's not that I'm fictionalizing.
I know what
I'm
you mean.
using it from a memory that's over 50 years old, and I'm sure I'm coloring it with my own pencils.
Absolutely. No, I would say like the class I'm teaching in July called Scene Stealer is probably a really good one.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
then that one's on Thursdays at 4.
Okay.
And Susan,
And that's the
you'd wanted to
okay.
talk about that as well, right?
Huh?
You had wanted to take a fiction class, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next one is Scene Stealer in July, and then I'll be doing a character one, and then Paige Turner comes back in December, I think, or I have to look at my own calendar. But
All right. Well, let me talk to you at maybe privately about maybe doing that class in July.
yeah, I mean, you can just register for it if you wanted. All the information is if I'll send you the link by text, and you click on it, and it says everything about the class, what it is, how long it goes.
All right.
Okay. All right, you guys. Talk to you later.
All right. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye.